Welcome, everybody. I know it's been a long day full of talks. My name is Nadir. If you weren't here before, I'm a storyteller. I create content around culture and preservation of heritage. And today's topic is very apt. It's about the preserving and promoting of culinary heritage. You're probably like me and find panels have a tendency to be very formulaic, to be at times a bit boring. What really value do we take from panels? So my job here is to ensure this remains as entertaining, informative, and powerful as can be. We're going to try and do things a bit differently here. And to my guests, that difference is what we're going to try and do is encourage as much diplomatic, loving conflict as possible. What we want is a really holistic environment in which we're sharing ideas, but hopefully I hope there are tensions and differences in how you go about approaching the same topic. And I might spark that, I might facilitate that. I don't mean it to be deliberately annoying, but the plan for me is just to get as much lessons from all of your expertise as possible. So if you'll give me your forgiveness in advance if I tend to be a little bit creating a bit of tension for the sake of the conversation. I'm going to allow you guys to introduce yourselves because I think you are the best people to do that. So starting from the far end, Omar, tell us about your work, what you do.
My name is Omar Shihab. I was born and brought up in Dubai in the UAE. I'm originally from Jordan. My dad comes from the northern part of Jordan. My mom comes from a city outside of Amman. This is my second career in life. I'm in hospitality at the moment. Been in hospitality for the last 16 years. I run a restaurant in Dubai called Boca, and Boca serves modern Spanish food. But regardless of the cuisine that we serve, I've always seen the restaurant as a platform to talk about all the topics that are relevant to us today, sustainability overall from a holistic perspective. And I'm usually involved in these kind of conversations, and I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Omar. Thank you so much. Karim?
I'm very excited to be here. My name is Karim Abdurrahman. I'm the chef and co-founder of Avec Karim. And like you as well, but we like to do it instead of a restaurant, we do our experiences in a mobile setting. So we're on the aim to really understand our journey as creating gastronomy here in Egypt and what that means and how that means to the lands here and how that means to us. And in the middle, just exploring my personal journey as well. And that's why the brand is Avec Karim. And just the intersection of that with the food presented in different experiences. And I'm excited to be here tonight, and it's a great topic.
Thank you, Karim. After you.
I am Menna El-Dorri. I'm very grateful that we're able to be here today. Safe. We don't have to worry about where our next meal is coming from. We don't have to run for shelter from bombs, and I think it's important to acknowledge this. We're lucky that we can talk about topics that are very close to our heart. I am trained as an Egyptologist, and I'm specialized in archaeobotany. So that's the study of archaeological plant remains. And through that, I'm able to study the history of food and the history of agriculture. And the reason I enjoy what I do very much, because when you talk to people, especially if I'm working in Egypt, talking to Egyptians about Egyptian food history, it's a way to connect us to our heritage that's very, very tangible. If I come and talk to someone about taxes in ancient Egypt, they're not going to be very interested. But if I talk about food in ancient Egypt or in medieval Egypt, it's something that's very alive and very relevant. And so this is what I do.
Thank you, Menna. Asma.
I'm Asma Khan. I have a restaurant in London. It's called Darjeeling Express. At the level that we are the only all-female Indian kitchen in the world. I am deeply committed to issues about gender equality. I think that all women should be safe in hospitality. I'm also someone who started, this is like Omar, my second innings. Not everybody will understand the cricket connotation and the link, but every game we all know has, 2 innings. And I opened my first restaurant when I was 48, and I wasn't sure. Everybody told me it would not work, that I needed professionals, and this meant men. This is really difficult because essentially for us women who come from so many different kinds of cultures, our roti, our bread is only valued when it's free. No one wants to pay us for our bread. And this bothered me a lot, that my kitchen of grandmothers and mothers was seen as inadequate, potentially we would fail. Within 3 months, I was approached by Netflix Chef's Table, who featured our story. I never began this as a project to be different. This was a battle cry for justice. I come from an ancient warrior race. I have the blood of warriors in me. And I was going to use hospitality and restaurant and food business not to make a career or become famous. I was going to do this to battle for the generation of women coming after me. I feel the breath of young, talented women behind me. I clear the pathways.
You better respect women, or my ancestors of female warriors are gonna come and get you. That was beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing, Asma. That, as you can see, we have a very varied panel expertise today, which I'm hoping you'll all tap into within your respective lanes. I love this title because at first glance I looked at it and I thought, oh, presumably it's a very interesting, positive debate about the preservation of culture. But actually, at second glance, I'm seeing an oxymoron. Almost. Actually, I'm seeing two terms actually which are quite opposing of one another, and they're not one of the same. The preservation of culture and the need to do so, but at times is also at odds with the need to promote culture. And sometimes in promoting something, we can also distill culture, we can simplify culture, we can also fossilize and tokenize culture. And this is the tension that we're trying to get through throughout the talk, the duration of this talk. One of the things I really want to kind of just to make sure we're all on the same common denominator is preservation of culture always a good thing, or can it at times also do harm? And I want to come to you, Karim, first.
I would say it depends on how you approach it. In general, preserving a culture is definitely a great thing, but it's how it's approached. That could, instead of presenting it in the right way, you can harm it or kill it. I think just speaking from maybe the Egyptian culture that speaks to us, that I can speak of, especially from a culinary point of view, I think for a long time, the problem was that inside we weren't even proud, or we weren't even preserving our own culture or being like putting effort into it. So how do you expect that people from abroad, or how do you expect that Egyptian culture would have, especially in food, have a stance if we've always had for many years a little bit of a shame, let's say, regarding like our history of food or Egyptian cuisine. We'd always look at it from let's say a down point of view. So I think it stems from that. It stems from how you see it. It stems from how what it means at the end of the day. Culture means, or preserving culture means preserving communities, means preserving values, means preserving stories, means preserving stories of people, of the land, and food. Of course, is one of the biggest platforms that can be used to do that, and that's where we see responsibility for me as a chef, but of course from all other sections, that using all this, of course, it adds a lot of depth to what we do. But at the end of the day, you have a message, or you have a goal to do, and if your food and the hospitality helps preserve that, helps tell their stories, helps promote the culture in the right way, with the proper research, then I don't see harm in that. But if the culture is misused for other purposes, which can be, of course, a problem, then definitely it's putting it in danger. And I'm sure we can all see examples of that, or we all have accounts. But that's how I see it.
But I'd actually love to learn more about that, specifically as someone who's not Egyptian. Maybe Menna, you can help us with that. Like, what are some of the ways that culture is abused in terms of its promotion?
I think when culture is distilled and used without understanding the background, so I'll give an example of ancient Egyptian motifs. You see young people using them on their t-shirts, but in a way that isn't actually representative of what these once meant. And so I think distilling culture into a few elements devoid of context, devoid of history, devoid of the heritage and the meanings that were actually ascribed to them, I think this is a misuse of culture. And I think this is how you end up losing culture, because you end up having like a Frankenstein monster of little bits of elements of your culture, but you've lost the essence of it.
Yeah, we were having a conversation downstairs actually at Zuba, and there was 5 people on the table, And Zuba split opinions amongst this table, where some people felt like Zuba, for example, actually wasn't really reflective of Egyptian street culture. It placated to a lens that is often external. And I guess this is something of you're talking about is, can at times the need to modernize or placate certain audiences just take away from the cultural nuance or depth of particular said culture?
I won't comment on Zuba because I'm a big Zuba fan.
Me too,
I
likewise.
absolutely love Zuba, and I think they've done an amazing job in having fun with Egyptian cuisine. And you said something about modernizing, and I think when you look at Egyptian cuisine and say, "Oh, I'm going to modernize it," Egyptian cuisine isn't an outdated product that you need to modernize. It's a product that you need to understand and have fun with it. Have fun with it because culture changes and you change certain things about it. But when I look at history and I look at all the people throughout history that had great ideas thinking they're modernizing cuisine, and then now we look at them 50 years later, 200 years later, and we think, it wasn't really very modern. I think Egyptian cuisine needs to be understood and appreciated for what it is. People need to have fun, whether chefs or cooks at home need to have fun with Egyptian cuisine without the need to elevate it or modernize it.
Absolutely. No, I love that. I think the Zuba case study for me is very fascinating because I actually see it as an incredible creative exercise to galvanize people's interest into the cuisine, which allows them in their own private time to learn more about the culture. How important is that? Let's say in the Zuba case, what it is really for me is PR. It's the branding of culture. How much is that playing a role in the modern restaurant business game through your work, what you've done? Does it play a big role in terms of how you put out a culture's brand? You having to understand how young people are going to engage with said brand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really love that example of wearing a T-shirt with a motif that you don't understand what it is. So it really starts with understanding the what. What are we talking about? And what is that topic? What is the ingredient? And why does it grow in this particular place? And why is it a staple in this particular country? And what kind of nourishment is it providing? And who was it feeding in the first place? But then also, how did we come about these stories? Usually who told the story and how it came about is really the reason why it resonates, and it's passed on from one generation to the other, and then it just becomes the absolute norm, and it's stuck to that particular culture. But we usually don't have that research, perhaps maybe because we haven't done our homework, or it's not documented in one particular place. So there's obviously that. So I think it's really, really critical to understand how did things arrive? How did recipes come about? And there's always been movement. It's not recent. Modernization, it's not something recent. Probably if you talk about previous generations from 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and obviously in our case here in the Egyptian case, thousands of years, there's always been that need to use new ingredients, new techniques that came from different parts of the world. So it's nothing new. But I think understanding the what and who's telling the story is extremely important. And then sending that across and obviously communicating and tell the story. And then linking it to what we were talking about earlier with Edward, learning and then evolving, so changing and then sharing. That's really what it's all about.
Yeah, and Asma, I'm sorry calling you Asma. It feels so disrespectful to me. I know privately I call her Auntie Asma, so forgive me if it kind of ebbs and flows between the two. But I know at Darjeeling, the food is rooted in a need and a deep desire to preserve certain cultural heritage dishes, but also extends beyond that in terms of the women that you work with and the culture that you create in the restaurant. Tell us more about that. Like, how important is it that your restaurant embodies cultural preservation beyond just the plate?
It is a very difficult place to be for us because we are against the tide. I mean, in UK, the impression that people have of Indian food, first of all, what is Indian food? India is massive. People's impression that we probably have a bath in ghee and cream because that's the kind of dishes that you get presented in the UK. And then the big problem we have is this thing of modernization, elevated Indian food, which basically means you give a 1-inch food on a 10-inch plate. You have so much edible flowers and micro herbs on your dish. I'll go and eat in a field if I have to eat all of this. I've not understood why people feel the need to make Indian food different. I say this many times. I am brown. My skin is brown. My food is brown. I am not ashamed of it. But when you go to these sophisticated fine dining Indian restaurants, you can be confused. The food is dissected. It should look anything but Indian. It should look French. The sauce is poured around. Oh my God. And this whole idea that you serve an inch of chicken, no rice, no roti, my grandmother who's already dead will die again. Because without, we don't eat that way. But in trying to be French and trying to be Japanese, we show our deep insecurity. We show the lack of our own courage in who we are. And the problem is, if we don't write our own story, somebody else will. And our entire problem is that, without taking pot shots at the male chefs, I will. They are terrible storytellers because they never learned from their mothers. All the chefs, the powerful chefs in Indian culinary tradition in India and in the West, learned in culinary school. They all went to the same culinary school and then they trained in Taj or Oberoi's. They learned in stainless steel empires because patriarchy runs so deep. Boys were never allowed into kitchens. They never helped their mothers. They were served with the men and boys. Women ate last, girls eat least in my culture. How will they understand the aroma of the mustard seed when it pops, or that last stage of the caramelized onions when you know the onions are ready? It hits you here. It's these beautiful things that make our culture, our culinary culture, so beautiful. But separated from this is a profession. Men have learned this as a way of making money. And good luck to them. The world is big enough for all of us. But they left no space on the stage that it had to be someone like me who came in with an all-female kitchen and the world told me I'd fail. And I thought, no, you watch me, I'll set the world on fire. You will all know who I am, because this was not, I personally am not so driven about these issues. It didn't bother me so much till I realized I was being told to stay in my lane. Not just as a woman who was in her late 40s, I was being told to stay in my lane as far as my culture was concerned, the food was concerned. We didn't have a space to give very simple dal and chawal, where nothing had to be twisted and given truffle oil on top. Let's slap everything with, caviar and seaweed. And why are we doing this? Our, our culture is not obviously as old as the Egyptian culture, but we have an old, old tradition. We come from an old civilization. But when you look at our food today in all these restaurants, you would think we just come off the bus in Delhi 2 years ago.
Thank you so much, Asma. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I somewhat agree, but are you telling me that when things take a more gastronomical methodology where they try to make the most out of little high quality produce, that it somehow becomes less culturally reflective of the culture itself?
Not at all. We have in one of my cookbooks, I have a recipe which is made with just peels of vegetables. I mean, we did Meatless Monday, we did sustainability, no waste, before the West figured it out. It's a bit like yoga. You need a Madonna to do yoga before all the Indians said, oh wow, yoga is a big thing. Like Ayurveda today. I am so tired of all these, slim, they're the size of my thigh, women teaching yoga today, and they cannot even pronounce the Sanskrit word. You think, what the hell are you doing? When you want to appropriate a culture and you want to make it like yours, and this is this new life that you're leading, learn to say the words correctly. So I'm not saying that, changing things, of course, change always happens. And change is not bad. I'm not a Luddite saying, oh, no, let's break up all the machinery and let's make everything by hand. Let's make our lives difficult. No, I just think that we are insecure because what is considered to be sophisticated for us is not our own culture. If you go to India, no one is opening an Indian restaurant. Everyone's using Indian, Mexican, Indian, Spanish, Indian thing. The fact that you now only get real food on the streets in these old traditional places, fine dining, I think has got to do with the fact that Indians themselves And I have faced a lot of these in my own restaurant. Do not think they will pay money, good money, for their own food. They want a foreign element in their food to make it worth their while. This shows their character, not mine. Someone told me, oh, I want to take the dal, can you take it off the menu? It didn't taste like the dal my mother makes. This is home style. I told him, I'm so sorry. Your mother is not cooking in my kitchen. But this kind of narrow-mindedness that, home food is just one particular thing shows that we have not had the conversations, we have not got the maturity, and we definitely do not have the sophistication to understand what our cuisine is, what other cuisines is, and we need to be open-hearted. And that we are not. We are so close-minded. I just want to make one more point. In India now, everyone's obsessed with the fact that, oh, samosa was ours, kebab is Indian, everything is Indian. Everything came from outside. Everything, including chilies and potatoes. We should not be so xenophobic about food, because in xenophobia and this absolute crazy patriotism that, our food is Indian, that is sacred, you don't even know your history. So it is complicated at many levels. Everyone's trying to be Spanish and French and Italian, and then everybody's also being xenophobic and saying, all these outsiders, we don't accept them, we don't acknowledge their food. Samosa is not Indian, please. It's not.
Thank you, Asma. No, that was really powerful. And I'm hearing this tension between cultural preservation and sophistication and not getting them confused. And this is where I want to come to you, Karim, because I would describe your work as very sophisticated, but also very Egyptian at the same time. So Asma, from what I understand, is saying that at times that these can be at odds, these two notions or concepts. So how do you strike that balance in representing Egyptian cuisine, which is so historical and deep, providing a level of sophistication, but not losing the nuance of what Asma has indicated to?
I think food and culinary is very vast, that you can present it in a multitude of ways and experiences. Of course, there's no doubt that presenting it, I always say that you cannot reinvent something that you don't know its tradition, its origin. Then what are you reinventing? And I think that's the core of it, because a lot of chefs, a lot of young chefs will be trying to redefine a cuisine or trying to redefine a dish that you don't understand its essence or how to come upon. And that's how it has actually value, and that's how it's very strong. So I think that's where perhaps gastronomy has taken a wrong, let's say, not turn, but a wrong vision on. Yes, I understand the small portions and the caviar. Of course, this is very European.
Don't be scared of her.
No.
Hey,
After all that,
Karim, you got something to say? You look her in the eye.
Just ignore him. He's just
And you
trying to
say-
wind us up. He's trying to get us to fight. We're both on the same team, okay? So don't let this boy. I am Asma auntie from now on, okay?
Always,
You
always.
just remember who's the auntie here on this table. Yeah. No, he's the.
Go ahead, Karim.
no.
I've got your back.
From in Baid, you're like,
Can I say something about
Please.
Karim's work that I think maybe people may not realize? So I do also have a problem with chefs coming in with their big fancy French education thinking they can make everything better. But what Karim and his team do is that they go across Egypt, they find traditional products that us in Cairo don't know about, products that are dying, that are disappearing, and finding ways to have fun with them. Not thinking, I am French trained, I know better, I'm going to make this better, but trying to appreciate these traditional products and thereby, I think, protecting a lot of these products from disappearing, because you're creating a market, even if it's a small market, you're creating a market for these. So that's one way of preserving.
thank you for saying that. I was literally about to.
Karim.
Thank you for saying that, because Karim, is obviously a very humble guy. But like from what I've learned about your work, which I'm so excited to try on Monday, inshallah, hopefully, is that it goes really deep into the details of the significance of these produce and presenting it throughout a culinary experience.
So thank you, Dr. Menna, for what you said, but especially these expeditions that we do as a team. So it's not just we understand about our cuisine, but the amount of stories that we meet in the middle, the amount of people, the amount of we see recipes that are dying, we see ingredients that are no longer being planted, or techniques that are. The problem is modernization has hit all the other. Egypt is very vast, just like India. You mentioned there's no Indian cuisine. Of course, there's no Egyptian cuisine. Cuisine in south of Egypt is something. On the coastal states is something. Cairo is something. in the desert is something completely different. And I think it's a richness of Egyptian cuisine that's very missing, and that's always been, people have always been just placing Egyptian cuisine in a very specific part, but it's so much more rich than that. And I think it's these expeditions that we do. And a shout out here to Mu'taz, who is the head of these expeditions. He would go and spend 2 months in the middle of the desert just to get us one ingredient, and we really know its story. Like this year, I think well, I'll give you an example of just two ingredients that perhaps will say a lot without saying a lot. One of which was in one of the expeditions in Siwa, which is a very magical oasis in the middle of the Western Desert. So there they use the sweetening agent they use in their dishes is actually a syrup that they extract from the palm tree. So it comes from the heart of the palm, which is no one in Egypt hears about, but it's something that speaks of our land. It speaks of our, and we've met with probably the last surviving guy who still extracts this in a way that protects the palm tree without killing it. And that's just the amount of stories you meet in the middle, and then that turned into completely different dishes when and I think for us what we've discovered over time is like Menna was saying, having fun with it, right? Like if you have the pressure of trying to preserve or trying to be academically correct, it won't it closes off so many creative ideas for the food. And I think we're very open about that we're creative, just sense experimental in terms of that. So that ingredient, for example, was it changed a lot in our dishes, and it helped us explore different things. One time it was in St. Catherine, which is in the Sinai Mountains, and there we realized there's a type of caper berries that goes wild, and then you ask the Bedouins there, and then they tell you they pickle it and eat it with fish, which is something you wouldn't envision being happening here. And the third ingredient, I think, just an example, was, of course, here everyone is so crazy, just like in India with the truffles, right? The European, okay, no problem with it, but it doesn't speak of us, it doesn't speak of our land, it has nothing. I understand maybe for Disfrutaro in Spain, it's something that grows, 5 kilometers away, but for us, it's something that doesn't make sense. However, we've realized that we have a variety of desert truffles that grows in the deserts of northwest of Egypt, and they're so incredible. However, the problem is, and that's where the problem lies, people knew about it, but everyone was trying to substitute the European truffles with that, and it didn't work, of course, because it's a different product. So many chefs they bring it, they try to shave it on top of pasta as if it's a cheaper way of getting it, and of course it doesn't work. But then we had to look at it from completely different eyes, and then we spent days just experimenting with it, and it turned out it's so much more complex. But you have to see it from different eyes. When people, or when we were seeing it with the eyes of, let's say, the French or that eye, it didn't give us anything, because we weren't authentic with it. We weren't true with it. And then when your mind changes like that, all these products, they just come to you, right? And I think we're very blessed to have these incredible products and these incredible people along the way. And I think, like you were saying as well, we opening mini markets, it feels very nice that our dishes opens markets for these products, right? It is a glimpse for these products to stay alive, or to stay, and that is the responsibility, maybe as a chef here, of chefs, because at the end of the day, we do the ordering, we do the menu, so there's a lot of times it is our responsibility to make sure how we source and what we present, and especially with the modern age where people are expecting the chefs to be the storytellers and to present and having this strong platform. So I think this is all responsibility to make sure your platform is actually considering all these aspects.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you, Karim, and thank you for your work. Like, I so much effort and heart goes into it. And I'm wondering whether some of the challenges you guys all face working in the food scene with all the effort that you do, whether in research or whether it's in actually running a restaurant or in cooking, whether it's also vulnerable to some of the challenges that I have as a storyteller. So sometimes when I put stuff out there that I've worked really hard on, sometimes I find actually that the biggest hindrances are people from within my culture itself. And sometimes the biggest support I've had is actually from people outside the culture, especially from the global north and the Western world, which we are so ready to attack for a legacy of trauma and crisis has caused our regions. but sometimes they've been my biggest supporters also in an effort to preserve my own culture. Do you find that this is a tension in the food scene in the same way in terms of preservation of heritage, how you put what you're talking about out there? Omar, I wanted to direct this to you because you have vast experience in restaurants across the region. But do you find that there's more appreciation of cultural preservation from cultures outside than within itself?
There's definitely an element of that, and we face it the whole time in our restaurant. We're trying, like I said, to use it as a platform to bring in ingredients from the region. What does that look like? We live in the desert. But this is, again, just touching a little bit about what Karim was talking about, this transformational power of chefs where they're part artisans in what they do, but they're also part artists, not in a way that, presenting just beautiful dishes, but helping us imagine combination of flavors and things through techniques that we never thought possible. So going back to your question, I think in terms of presenting something new, a new ingredient from the region in a way that hasn't been seen before, yes, in the beginning, there is a bit of excitement about a particular product that maybe not a lot of people know, that it grows in a certain micro season, that is only available in certain ways, that it was used in the past or harvested in a certain way. So there is definitely resistance. I find playing on the nostalgic bit really helps. So one of the successes that we've had in the restaurant, working with local native desert plants to the entire peninsula, actually, hummed and khubbez, that grow in Jordan. Lebanon grows here, but also grows in the UAE. And growing up there myself, I know that my father knows this from his childhood growing up in Jordan, but also has a deep connection with the people of the UAE, where immediately after the rainy season, when they would go out in the desert, they would remember them foraging for it, picking it, and remember the distinct flavor and taste of that. So chef has created a salad out of it, really simple, but it's not seen in commercial spaces, and it's always such a pleasant surprise. And without fail, every single person who's tasted it, from Emiratis locals, who are usually very skeptic and our biggest critics, they immediately have this nostalgic moment just by mentioning the name. So there are certain ways to play it. Yes, of course, I totally agree. I think we need to tread carefully. And this is a question that was directed to Mustafa earlier on today. You can't fake genuine approach. You can't fake genuine hospitality. So if you're doing it within that context, not just wanting to tick boxes or just to say, present something for the novelty out of it, I think that is definitely a way to introduce it.
Menna, how about you as a food archaeologist? Because do you find that there's an appreciation from outside the culture from actual people within it? How have you navigated if that is the case? And maybe it's not the case, and maybe I got that completely wrong, but have you witnessed that within your world? Because also, sorry, just to add on to that, just to add on to that question, is that I'm also hearing from old civilizations like Indian culture and Egyptian culture about an issue of self-worth, right? Cultural self-worth, that it's been so diminished, pillaged, raped over the course of generations that really how we perceive as ourselves is been reduced, right? We don't think our food has value. We don't think our culture has value. So in the context of that, are people actually interested in terms of our culinary heritage in the way that we would like them to be? And if so, how do we imbue a sense of excitement and adrenaline and yeah, just general energy around the heritage of our produce and culture?
What I see very often is a lot of Egyptians, very much like what you said, they look at Egyptian cuisine as something very boring, something incredibly bland. They look at it as though, khalas, they know everything that is to know about Egyptian cuisine without really understanding, like Karim says, how vast the Egyptian cuisine is. And very often when I tell people I work on food heritage, food history, archaeology, they say, there's no such thing as Egyptian cuisine. And this is, of course, I see a few heads nodding. It's one of the things that really gets to us, because there is an Egyptian cuisine, and just because someone is unaware of it or thinks that it's beneath them, too mundane, too quotidien, something that we eat all the time, it's not as interesting or as exciting to them as other cuisines, or maybe if they add a little bit of truffle oil, that elevates it and makes it better. So locally, I think within Egyptians and within the society, people don't think very highly of the cuisine. And one way to get people excited is to remind them that we actually don't know as much about Egyptian cuisine as we think we do. We think in Cairo we know everything, but there are so many products, cooking techniques, dishes, and whose names we don't even know. And that novelty of discovering something that is so close to home, but you don't know anything about, I think excites people a lot. And when you also look at very simple ingredient, something that I'm very passionate about is purslane, regla. I love regla. It grows everywhere as a wild weed. And when you talk to people, oh, you can make it into a salad. I don't know where in Palestine they make it like this, or in Syria they make it like this. And people think that something that is a weed, that is absolute rubbish to them, can be so exciting, and that it's also shared amongst other cultures and amongst our neighbors, and also in the Mediterranean. It becomes more exciting and it gives value. So to go back to your question, I think when we realize we have things that we don't know, that piques our interest in our heritage. And when we realize that we share something with other countries or other cultures and they do it similarly or a little differently, that also excites people.
And Asma, auntie, how do you? Thank you, Menna. And to kind of tie these two thoughts together is, how do you create a sense of discovery around a cuisine in which people are quite familiar with, especially like Indian cuisine? When people come to Darjeeling and they're having an experience with you, what is it about your institution that evokes a sense of like wonder, despite them knowing Indian cuisine very well? Like, how do you do what she's suggesting we should do to reinvigorate our interest in a culture that we're actually very familiar with and maybe don't at times take for granted?
It's difficult, and that's really a great question, because especially British people, chicken tikka masala, they created this. They seem to think that they're an authority on Indian food. And it's, from the 1950s, of course, going back to colonial time, in fact, there's always been this link with spice, and the two cultures have been connected. There are some dishes that have come out because of this relationship. I try not to blind them with science. I do not try to frighten them by making my politics too obvious. It is possible. I can be very toned down. I am very respectful and I present the food. But visually, the most powerful thing is when you look into my open kitchen, you will see three grandmothers and women cooking. That immediately tells you the feminine energy of what they're going to be presented with. And the fact that never, you do not go in anywhere. Our women cook behind walls, behind pardas, behind veils. They are never presented in the front. We are not seen as creative. We are not seen as dynamic. Our food is now almost is taken for granted. People eat the food that women have cooked and leave the table. They never check how much food is left in the kitchen. So it is that, just the visual of when you walk in. When I designed the restaurant, my accountant was saying, "Are you crazy? These are the money tables. This is the best location." I said, the money table is where the women are. I want everybody to see the women. I try to bring in dishes that celebrate that incredible, resilient person who never anyone talks about, which is the street food vendor of Calcutta. The poor, they don't have all the equipment that all these people, if someone comes with an orange full of meat, that person is in some other planet. The fact that people are making food that is complicated, I admire them. But when the poor makes something beautiful out of literally nothing, no refrigeration, no heat, this magic. So one of the things that you will find in my restaurant is the street food that all tell a story. And I also always tell the story of what the dishes are. We have one dish which is a prawn shrimp dish that was made on the streets of Chinatown. There's only Chinatown in India is in Calcutta. And then I tell them in 1962, the Indians did what the Americans did to the Japanese. We had a war with China. They picked up all the Chinese people who were in the restaurant business and interned them in a desert. Have you ever heard of this? No. We don't talk about this. They came back poor. They lost everything. They made this prawn on the streets. I remember eating this as a very young child, and then they all disappeared. They migrated.
That's, I mean, that story is crazy, first of all. But this, you said something there which really interests me, is that does something have more value if it's had more hardship associated with it? And does that make it worthy of preservation more than something that maybe has less hardship?
Yes, and I say this as someone from a family background where we are also losing. I come from a royal family, and for us, especially Muslims, Muslim royal families are losing our culinary tradition very rapidly because partition destroyed us. The exodus of families that went to the other side, this side, we stayed and we faded away. I speak about forgotten feasts. So for me, it's a crazy schizophrenic kind of situation where I am looking at the food of the poor using ingredients that the rich people don't eat, like chickpeas. We call it Kabuli chana. It came from the Khyber, from Egypt. The, the chickpeas that you have, which is chana masala, came from Egypt and the Afghans got it into India. But because it was white and shiny, they stopped eating the black chickpeas that was native to India. That's what I serve in my restaurant. So I have used the restaurant menu to be like a book about the loss and hardship. And yes, hardship is something that's very important for me. But as someone from a royal family, I don't disregard my bloodline. The biryani I make is also something that is fading from all memories. That biryani is only made in the few families left, like ours, who make this biryani this particular way. So every day, I live one day less. Every morning I say Alhamdulillah because I get to see another day. And I will use that day to do everything I can to tell the stories of my people and food. This is so important for me. And I'm grateful for the fame and all the books and the television series and all. This was not what I was trying to do. I wanted to take my flag and put it in the soil and mark the area that this is our cuisine. This is the food of my people. Because we are marginalized at many levels. And so it's very political, it's complicated, but every day I'm grateful I have a restaurant. And I feel so happy when I go and I see people eating and I go and tell people what they're eating. This is not like, oh, this is good service. It matters to me. I want people to know what they eat and why it's on the menu.
Yeah, no, thank you. Beautiful again. You also mentioned something really interesting to me also, is like, and you're very much like my mother says the same thing, is that my mom just gets really jaded with the whole like science of the culinary cuisine, right? Like she at times thinks it can also be a bit what's the word for it, narcissistic at times, right? Where the food actually takes a secondary place and the actual process and the science comes first. So how do you, Omar, I'm going to send this to you, but how do we navigate that tension between presenting a culture in a way that we are passionate, want it to be seen, but also getting really giddy and really like nerdy about the science element of it, of how it's procured, how it's presented, how it's plated, like fungi from the horseshoe of a baby lamb or something, or whatever, and they make it into like a prawn cracker, whatever. But like sometimes we can like be jaded by that experience. Does it take away from the cultural soul, on which I think Asma is indicating to?
No, it's such a fine line to navigate, for sure. I totally agree. From my perspective, I've always wanted to bring in, I didn't talk about my first career growing up, it was in research. So there is that element that I always wanted to bring in, which is trying to be not just authentic in everything that we present, but also has a lot of backing, because I wanted to stay away from running a restaurant that we always think about where the maitre d' is talking about secret recipes on a particular ingredient that he cannot sort of tell the source from. So that transparency, I think that brings in something for sure. It lets the restaurant become a platform rather than the sole creator, because we're only as good as the ingredients that come into us, and there are artisans and farmers and fishermen and people that have been doing what they've been doing for a long time, and they know that product particularly really, really well, and they work with the soil, and they're really more in tune. So I think I see it from a perspective where I'd like to tell their stories to the people that don't have perhaps the time or privilege that I've had to go and understand all of that and travel and see them in their own places. And I think there is real value in that, where we are not the main character, but it's really the ingredients coming in. But then there is also a process that we have to go through. The chef has to go through that process to get the best out of that product, where in its maybe natural form is not something that we can present the way it is. We're going through that process at the moment. We've been working very closely with the Agricultural Center for Biosaline Agriculture, and this is a group of scientists that have been working since 1999 in the UAE at trying to understand native crops to the region that can grow in poor soil and harsh conditions. So it's really important to understand the science out of that. There is no, for a lot of these ingredients, things like halophytes, things like amaranth that we saw earlier on, millets, these are naturally climate resilient crops. So no genetic modification is done here. And they can provide a highly nutritious ingredient, a lot of essential amino acids. So there is a technical science that has to come through if we want to show, especially in a place like ours where it's scarce. There is really not a lot that grows there. So we'll have to look a little bit closer, and we'll have to use a bit of that science. But how do we present it? Of course, it needs to be a gentle way of presenting that. I think in the restaurant world, people don't go dining out mostly for sustainability, or so you'll have to really provide some context for sure. But at the end of the day, it needs to be delicious, it needs to be presentable, it needs to be at the value or the price point that you think is right for your guests. But if it can have that story, and if it's something that can help us advance, and it's there for people to read, if they don't want, then it's absolutely fine. Yeah. I think there is that fine line for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I'm all for the science if I feel like it has a trickle down effect on the people, right? And for me, other than that, then it just becomes another bastion in which the privileged can like laugh and sit together in a room and discuss how amazing this food is and whatever they've researched and how it's affected their plate, unless it's really having tangible impact on the communities themselves. I always wonder that, like, is there trickle down effect on some of these explorations and some of these things that are being done, and does it affect real day-to-day people anywhere in the world?
You're absolutely right. That's why it needs to be also relevant to the space. I can't be talking about an ingredient that is extremely fascinating, but it's growing in Costa Rica. Why is it relevant to us? Why does it give us a kind of sense of, not just a sense of place, but a sense of time, what is happening today, either in terms of the change of environment or climate, or in terms of political and geographical things. I think just going back to that, where who tells the story, and sometimes you want to make sure that the oppressor is not telling the story in these terms. So it's really important and key to learn and document, whoever is responsible for these ingredients, and how we're transforming it and who's telling the story. There's something really valuable in that.
Definitely. Menna, I want to come to you. Related to what Omar was saying is, I think it'd be really useful for all of us actually who are not Egyptian here to kind of get some localized knowledge of actually what's happening within the culinary cultural scene here. What are some of the culinary facets or components which are in need of preservation that we should be more aware of?
How much time do we have?
Maybe you can give us the top 3 that you think we should take notice of, and we should consider them.
It's a very difficult question. I think there's a lot that needs to be preserved. Wild species, for example, like Hobeza, Mallow, and Rigla, purslane, because their habitat is changing, and these are going to disappear very, very soon. Although they're incredibly resilient, I think these need to be preserved. But I think preservation is wonderful, and I think we need to strive to preserve as much as we can, but documentation like you said, documentation is so important because you can't stop change, you can't stop the loss of culture, no matter how hard we try. I think it's important to be aware of that. We can't freeze culture in the moment it is now. And if we document as much as we can, then we are preserving it in a sense. So even if one day something like purslane completely disappears, we would have a record of what once existed. And that's important, again, to your point of who tells my story, who tells my history. I've documented that in my culture 100 years ago or 200 years ago. And it's not necessarily about ownership, but it's about documenting a state, documenting that I had this 1,000 years ago. I think that's incredibly important.
Thank you, because that leads perfectly to my next point: is who are the bosses at the top who are determining what gets preserved and what doesn't? What are the factors in the culinary world that determine what is worth preserving and what isn't? Can you shed some light as a layman on who these people are? Is it states? Is it individuals, companies? Is it platforms? Who are the powers that be that are determining what we should be aware of and what we shouldn't be aware of, or what we should be preserving, what we shouldn't be preserving, if there are any? Let's go to Karim.
I think Menna could answer that better.
I just want to get into like the good stuff. Yes.
I'm sure it depends on which era, like who would control the narrative of what gets preserved. I'm sure at some point in the past 100 years, it was definitely like like mass production and all that probably like has gotten into what gets preserved and what gets branded somehow. But I think it ends up being like returning back to the old story of if you're proud of something and you do the effort as a community, and I think that's like, and I think that's especially in like relating to our Egyptian cuisine or preserving that culture. I think the problem we have is we never united, like, because it needs an archaeologist, it needs a chef, and it needs a researcher. It needs so many aspects. There's so many elements to it to actually preserve, and it needs something from a commercial point of view as well to find in the modern way a place that it fits. So I think that's what would change, or that would what could dictate what's being preserved or no. Um, I think being in the gem here, we have the perfect example of who preserved everything. You know, I think as Egyptians, we had the perfect example of how our culture was preserved. And I'll say a small funny story, and I've said that a million times, but I think the point, you know, I've started my culinary career the very traditional French way of a culinary school in Paris, etc. But the moment that actually changed how I think was we had a very interesting class called food history. This is a French professor, you know, very academic. And then before the exam, he told us if you have any question that relates to what's the origin of a specific ingredient, if you don't know, just say Egypt and you have a 90% chance that it's correct. And that's changed everything, you know. The first bread, the first wheat, the first everything started here. So I think that was also a point of like looking back at like looking back at what we used to preserve or what we used to be proud of. We used to be proud of our lands, nothing else.
Absolutely.
And that is just the main essence of it.
And you should be, absolutely. I mean, Egypt was the garden of the world for so long, definitely, 100%. And I asked that question because it wouldn't really be much of an exploration of like preserving and promoting culture without actually really understanding the obstacles in that process. And look, it's not my first time in the Middle East. It's not my first rodeo. I understand that it's difficult to like talk about these things in a way that alludes to some sort of positive outcome. But like, there are real determiners of what we're allowed to do and what we can work in. And like in my world, it's also the platforms, which I know it influences your works, right? Sometimes now TikTok and Instagram are actually becoming the preservers of culinary traditions, right? And they are determining how chefs cook, what chefs cook. They're determining the plating and how it looks. And Asma, I want to throw this to you. The same question really is, within your work, has there been forces that impact what you are able to present out of your culinary heritage? And how have you navigated that?
Well, I have not allowed that to step on me. But I know that there is almost this unspoken pressure. This is why when you go to any of the Indian Michelin star restaurants, their food looks more or less identical. They will have the same kind of dal and they will make a cigar out of halwa inside it and fry it in phyllo pastry. There are all these funny tweaks that they all do because once something is successful, it's almost like a domino effect. Everyone wants to fit into that. And it's not that I started Darjeeling Express to try to be different. I don't know how to cook any other way. I can't do all these fancy bits. I just know how to cook like my mother and my grandmother. The thing is that there is a lot of pressure, especially with the young generations and what social media is absolutely spreading in a place like India, where people may not be able to read and write, but everybody has a smartphone as is looking at screens. It's changing the entire dynamics of what people know about their heritage. The only saving grace is that people, this also frees them up because they don't need to have a sophisticated camera. They can pick up something, someone who's cooking on a terracotta pot with wood fire, some grandmother. That's also happening. So it's you know, it's a double-edged sword. We are stuck in this state where people are obsessed about all things fancy there, and that's what you see on TikTok. But occasionally there's a bright light where people have actually picked up something that is obscure, that is dying out. I have a feeling, unfortunately, that the airhead, empty-headed, you know, screen swiping people will win, sadly, because that's where the money is. That's where the ads are. That's where the commercial aspect is. And this is unfortunately also this thing about speaking English, that anyone who speaks English in India is now considered to be intelligent and educated. That's not necessarily true. But this whole thing of what is happening in India is this kind of, it's being hijacked by a kind of class of people who are suave and sophisticated and they think they're like they're Europeans, but actually they're Indians. And they're living this kind of, presenting it in this style which is very alien. So I think that there are too many forces. India is a complicated space and it's not something that you can step in very easily. Not everybody is welcome. We have a deep-rooted separation based on caste, how you were born, what you can eat. And if you were lower caste, even your shadow polluted a well. You were not allowed into spaces, you were not given food, you could not eat with other people. Someone, because of my religion, may not want to sit next to me and eat. We have been separated. Because one thing is that this whole thing is in the Quran, is the Bible, and the Torah. Breaking bread brings people together. That does not happen in India. This is not going to happen in India as well because no one has raised their hand and said, can we be united? Can I share this table and eat with a Dalit or a lower caste person? I sit with a Muslim, I sit with a Christian, I sit with different people. We may not eat each other's food. This is the big problem. So those who are the loudest, who are powerful, will get a chance to talk about their cuisine. Those that are marginalized and weak because of the political system will find their stories unavailable for others. This is a problem, and this is something that concerns me deeply.
Absolutely, as it should. Min, I wanted to ask you a similar question in the sense of, as a researcher, academic, do you feel like the availability of information on social media has increased people's cultural nuance and awareness, or do you feel like it's more ephemeral and it's there one minute it's gone, then they're not actually more educated than they were previously?
The problem with a lot of content, especially about food history and food culture, food history on social media is incorrect. And a large part of it is because academics like myself take such a long time to publish, and we don't often make our research available to the public in accessible ways. And that's a problem. That's a huge problem. So every feast you get, people start talking about the traditional foods of this particular feast, and a good 3/4 of the information posted is completely incorrect. And when you start to correct that, because it's a given, it's part of our identity that this particular dish comes from ancient Egypt. And when you say, actually, we don't have evidence for that, it doesn't, or the evidence says that it's only 200 years old, people get incredibly offended, as though you're taking away part of their identity. And
you got 10 million views though. It's like it's promoting culture, surely.
And that's the thing, once it's online, it's forever there. And people use that as a source, for example, on Wikipedia. Then you find all these incorrect information being perpetuated and repeated mindlessly by people, and it becomes fact. So that's a big issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And another one is, so we have thank you for that. We have the algorithms and we have the platforms determining what is preserved and what isn't. But another thing I also see as a determiner of what's being preserved and what isn't is the climate. The climate is one of the biggest determiners of what is preserved and what's not. What's interesting to me is that, like, people think sustainability is about preserving certain dishes, but if there was no availability of certain produce, there wouldn't be those dishes in the first place. So I don't feel like people understand that nuance about how important sustainability is in the conversation of preserving cultural heritage. And I'm wondering, like, as a storyteller myself, are there ways, Omar, me and you, for example, as someone who makes digital content, you as someone who has a sustainable restaurant, ways that we would be working together, and what does that look like practically for people who might want to do like a similar creative project in terms of increasing people's awareness around sustainability in cuisine and culture?
I think going beyond the word, it has been used in so many ways that it lost its meaning, honestly, sustainability. Try to avoid that word and try to understand what it means in terms of everything that we do in the restaurant, right? A lot of sourcing. So we're responsible for buying a whole bunch of things, not just food and beverage, but also, you know, things that go into the operation of the restaurant. So there's a lot of that. Where are we putting our money? We have huge purchasing power. So where are we putting that? Who are we choosing to represent in our dishes, in our cuisine? What hero ingredients do we choose to talk about? Do we choose to talk about things that are considered luxury in other parts of the world, or things that are rare or micro-seasonal, or that has a story and a connection with this particular part of the world and the challenges that we're seeing today? Who do we choose to platform? So there's tremendous work that can be done there. There's a lot of work that chefs are naturally designed to do and professionally trained to do, utilizing the entire ingredient when it comes to the restaurant. This is something that comes as second nature, making sure that there is really nothing that gets thrown out to the bill. So the whole no waste approach is not something new to us in the kitchen world. And then everything else that we look at in running a restaurant and running any business, or actually at home, switching off the lights when you leave, making sure that all the equipment is maintained up to scratch. And then the part that is harder to measure in sustainability, which is the community part. So we are part of the community. We are part of the area that we're in. A lot of things in the past used to happen in restaurants. A lot of important conversations, a lot of political movements, a lot of change stemmed from meetings that used to happen in restaurants. So I think there is a very, very deep connection between what we do, between what chefs do, between the influence that chefs have on trends and nutrition and the way forward and telling the story. And at the end of the day, I really want to bring that topic again, which is who tells the story at the end. Without that, without telling that story of the prawns, Asma, we wouldn't know about a lot of things that happened. So who do we want to leave it up to? And then that question earlier on is, if we don't intervene and if we don't have platforms to discuss all of this, it's going to be left to the three corporates that run the food world. It's more and more getting into that, it's getting consolidated. A lot of like smaller companies are being bought by the larger ones, so that even our food is being controlled by certain labels or certain brands. And immediately comes to mind this whole meatless movement that started a few years ago. Is, for me, it's awful, because what we're letting go is access to food IP. So these guys, this is venture capitalists going and saying, oh, we're going to create a recipe that you're going to buy food from us, and it's going to be a secret recipe, we're going to IP it. Where food is, farmers are people who share seeds, they share knowledge, they share ideas. So letting go of that in the hands of these others is really letting go of our sovereignty, of our freedom, letting go of our source of sustenance, our source of food.
Yeah, and I just don't think that conversation has had enough. And I think like climate, who's telling the story, how we tell that story, and its importance to some of these recipes and ingredients that we've grown up with. That I just feel like I wish that conversation was more available. Maybe it's something me and you can do something together in the future. It's going to plug myself there and be like, yo, Omar, maybe we can work together. Another thing I wanted to discuss also is kind of this tension with tourism, right? And let's be very real, that tourism is a massive facet of our world and our governments and what we're doing. And there's a huge need to export our culture in a way that's palatable to people to feel that they can participate in it. But like, what is that threat of being lost in promoting over preserving? And Karim, how do you strike that balance between the two? Because for me, sometimes actually when we promote, and that is the inherent intention, it can become performative. Culture becomes something that's less lived, but it's like a theatrical play that's being done for people to be able to participate on a very superficial level. So how do we navigate that? How do we work that tension, or how do we allow people to participate on a deep level? And I actually think your work is perfect to discuss that, because
I think what it boils down to is that being genuine with what you share. So be it no matter how you're serving it, or if you're actually genuine in the way you're researching it, in the way you want to serve what you want with the story you tell, that's what reaches the people. That's what reaches. And the food is the best carrier of emotions at the end of the day. Like the example at your restaurant, I'm sure it's all the love of the grandmother. This is what you're tasting at the end of the day, right? It's if you get the same recipe, give it to a chef with the gram, it will never be the same. And food, at the end of the day, I'm just speaking about food and that specific end of culture, is the perfect carrier of emotions. Of if you're actually genuine in what you're cooking, in what you want to tell, it will do it naturally. It will do it naturally, no matter if it's a gastronomic experience or if it's something that's trying to stay true to, like if it's street food, or no matter the format. I think all formats have a, in if you're talking tourism, all formats have a client to it, or reaches someone else. So it's important to have all the formats, but what is common between all of them is the shared values and um, the shared, like being genuine about what you're serving. You can't hide anything. You can't hide bad ingredients. And I always say we're not magicians. As chefs, we're not magicians. We can't take an ingredient that's not so good or that's not handled properly and turn it into something nice. Same way we can't take an ungenuine story or take something that's not actually proper and make it won't reach. It won't be true, and it won't touch the people. And I think in culture, people want to be touched. People want to feel what's actually genuine, what's actually authentic, because it can very easily be commercialized. It can very easily be taken into directions that would kill the culture or present it in a wrong way. So I think as just for my profession as chefs, we do have the responsibility of being responsible in the sourcing, being responsible in the community of who's actually serving it, who's behind the bars. And that's it boils down to that for me.
And intention underpins everything ultimately. I just let me know, because I want to keep some time for the audience to give a question. So let me know how we're doing for time. But are we no? Okay, cool. So you're not gonna get any time for questions. I'm sorry about that. But okay, great. Yeah, exactly. So just let me know. But what I wanted to come back to you about this idea of who tells the story, and sorry to bring it up again, because I know you probably talk about it everywhere you go. But in your case, it was Chef's Table coming to tell your story, right? And like, I would love to get an insight into that process. I know me and Huda talked about this a lot, but like, what are the mechanics of someone like a Chef's Table coming up to you and being like, Asma, you're really inspirational. What you do with your work is really fascinating. Do they empower you to determine how that story is told, what facets of your culture should be told, what should be shot? How empowered were you throughout that process? Or was it a narrative that was projected onto you that you kind of didn't really have much control over?
No, absolutely not. You know me. No one's going to tell me what to do. I was not scripted at all. I told this. This is the stipulation before we started filming. I told them that I had to go to India. It's completely unscripted. When they came to me, I also asked if I could show my team. It was a call, and I thought I dropped out of the call. They said, we did 35 chefs before you. Not a single one asked to show their team. I said, not only are you going to show my team, you're going to name them and name the village that lamented the birth of this girl. I'm a second daughter. I know the lamenting that happened at my birth. It was as if it was a death in the family. I was unwanted and unloved. I used Chef's Table to say one thing that no one can say easily in our culture, that my mother wept when I was born. So this is no script. These 16 people who came to film me, when I spoke, I looked up and everyone was weeping. I spoke about how it is to know that you were not the wanted one, that you were not celebrated, and that you were the other. It wasn't my own parents, my mother was made to feel she failed when she gave birth to me. So this is not a script, and this is why a lot of people know my episode. I know it's one of the most watched episodes in the entire Chef's Table because you can relate to this because so people meet me and say, "Oh my God, you're just like this is Chef's Table." I said, "What do you think? It's the same person." It changed my life. I never realized fully what it would do. I just thought that we never get the spotlight on us. I spoke for the women in their graves. I spoke for the girls who were lamented. I'm going to get emotional. I spoke for the girls who never made it. We have the highest number of female infanticide. We have a sex ratio of male and female, which is not real. For the girls who never made it, I had to speak about something that mattered to me. I wasn't going to go and do a gold tweezer, kind of gold leaf on some kebab and then talk about my traumatic journey. I'm no Van Gogh. I'm not this traumatized chef with a lot of chefs present themselves as going through this creative process. This is their journey. I thought I have finally got a chance to speak for women who at this point don't have the stage. I'm going to use this episode not to talk about food, but talk about power and injustice and the rights of women. And that's what I did.
Thank you, Asma. That was really, really beautiful. Sometimes questions, yeah, I'd love to pass the baton on to the audience. I'm sure you guys have questions. So if anyone has any burning questions that they'd like to ask, now is your time. You will never see any of these people ever again in your lives. Cool.
Okay, thank you guys. It was a lovely talk. However, I do have a burning question. I feel like sometimes there's a lot of tension when we talk about promoting cultural heritage, is that you take, especially with like ingredients and things like that, sometimes you take an ingredient that's always existing or has existed in popular cuisine that's been available to the masses, and then it's upscaled and elevated, and then it's only available to a very specific portion of the population. You're kind of gentrifying that ingredient, and then it loses its essence because it's no longer that kind of popular ingredient that was available to the masses anymore. And then the masses no longer know this ingredient, so it's actually dying out of a huge, like actually the majority, and especially in Egypt, of the population. So how can you make like the preservation of heritage available and accessible to the masses and not just, those that can afford it? And I know it's tricky because the money only goes so far, but I don't know. Any thoughts?
Have we stumped you?
No. But I think there's someone in the audience who would perfectly answer this. If we can pass it to Mu'taz, because he's very advocate about.
Yeah, thank you, Noah, for the question. Actually, it's a very important question because we found this with one of the ingredients. For example, we have been trying to use it for 3 years, and one of the things that we know, if we used it, if we had a big order, we're gonna pay like a premium for it. We don't want to do any. We don't need any discounts. We need the people who are going to get this to have a decent life out of this, so they can save it. But at the same time, it will be expensive for the locals to use the same ingredient.
Yeah.
This is one thing, and the second thing is the environmental impact. That if this thing is people are gonna like it, we need more of it. And if not a lot of people know how to extract this properly, probably we'll do like an environmental crisis in that oasis if everybody wants to sell this expensive ingredient. And so it is very tricky to deal with every single ingredient. It takes us years, and we know this is a lifetime project. It's not about like doing it fast. It's about like building this understanding, and we talk with the people. We let them taste what we are doing, so and bring it back to them. And also how to like Karim always says that we work for the ingredient. We are serving this ingredient, and we are trying to present it in the best way and make it accessible originally for the people who produce it. We face this with tens, I can name tens of ingredients that we can't touch because we don't know the environmental and the social impacts of using this ingredient. It's like a treasure, but I can't touch it. I just need to be very, very careful what's gonna happen if I release this. We have ingredients that we want to send to chefs all over the world because we know that this is our mission to share our culture with the world. But if I did this and it became expensive and it just like killed the culture, this is actually, as you just said in the beginning, it's just like an oxymoron thing. Like, so it's very tricky. It is if you're working in a landmine and you want to present things, but you have to be very cautious about it. Yeah. So one of the things is that we involve our partners. We call them our partners, like Abu Eid, who brings us the terfes, like Mansour, who brings us the lagbi, with everything. What we are building the future with them. It's their thing. It's not ours, and we are just serving them. We're serving them, and we're telling them that we will buy, but just like let's do it in a sustainable way. Yeah.
Are there any more questions that people have? We have one. Any more? Two? Why don't we just get the questions first, and then we'll try to get all the panelists to answer them at the same time. That way we can get through more.
Hi, everyone.
Hey.
Actually, it's not a question. I just want to say
Sure.
something. Thank you for what you tell us, for the knowledge we got. I just want to say something. I'm not a good chef, but I like to cook. But when I cook, it depends my mood. If it's my mood, it's good, so the dish will be, delicious. When my mood is bad, I think my dish will be, maybe more salt or something like this. So I think also sometimes our feeling effect of the dish of the food. That's it. Thank you for
Absolutely,
listening.
definitely. Nefes, man. Absolutely. We have at the front here. We'll call this the last one of the day, and then we'll tie up.
Thank you all. It was absolutely inspiring, and I just wanted to highlight something that we kept talking about preservation of things that are outside of us, but what about preserving the palate? Because the common taste also dictates what we consume and which direction we go in. And when melted cheese comes out of a burger, has finally, been appealing to everyone. It's sad to see that happen. But what do you think our efforts should be to preserve the palate?
Thank you. Great question. Is that directed to someone specifically?
I was going to say Asma, but I'm male, so I'm already disadvantaged in asking her.
No, that is a very good question. I think that in India, we've always had things that are bitter. Bitter gourd. We have this whole thing of bitter because this is the Ayurvedic concept that bitterness then releases saliva so you can eat something. But no one wants to eat bitter things now. And so this is a really good point you made, that, the globalization of the palate is finishing us because it is sadly dumbing down. I will not name the country that is dumbest of all. That is ruining.
We know.
Yeah, we all know. Yeah, the dumbest of them all. So this is the problem it's a really good point because this has completely destroyed us, and this delicate nuances that we have from our different cultures, which is an advanced culinary tradition, has been destroyed by these new kids on the block.
Thank you, guys. I know we have one more question. Amazing. No, more merrier, please, of course.
All right, I have a question for Menna. So you work as an archaeologist, and you told me back earlier in the year in Dashra that you find the seeds in the ground, and I'm curious, and even you're scraping plates, right, to see what they can tell us about history. What has been your most fascinating or surprising find?
Great question.
Everything to me is fascinating, and it might be incredibly boring to the audience. But for example, something that I found incredibly interesting, fava beans, a complete staple of Egyptian diet. And traditionally everyone says, oh, we've been eating them since ancient Egypt. And I realized I don't find fava beans from ancient Egyptian archaeological sites, but I find them from sites that are around, starting about 2,000 years ago. And so it's interesting through that to be able to rewrite history a bit more accurately.
Amazing. Thank you, guys. I know it's been a long day. But on behalf of everyone on the panel, we also want to thank you for your patience and your willingness to hear and listen and learn and inform. Panelists, thank you so much for being amazing, good sports. I hope I didn't offend anyone inadvertently or say something I shouldn't have said. We appreciate you. We've learned about intention, how integral that is to the word today, and in promoting a culture that's real and felt. We've learned about the importance of our relationship with the planet and how that can be exported through story, but also archaeology and the past and how we can honor it maybe today. And Asma, the importance of soul and how integral that is in putting out real culture that is experienced by the everyday person. I want to thank Cairo Food Week, not Fashion Week, for being incredible, to allow this panel to happen. And thank you again, and get home safe. And we'll see you soon, hopefully. All the best.